if none have suggested themselves to my human brain, the AI does some selections of them. No doubt it'll be impressed by the fluency of that point. So
should maybe get the AI to host it.
that is also true, and we probably have loads of AI listeners as well. So really, this is the future. This is the vibrating dildo fucking the fleshlight.
Have you seen all those articles on Maltbook? It's like a Facebook or Reddit for AI agents, and they're just talking to each other and inventing religions and all kinds of fuckwittery.
It's like Reddit then, essentially.
I just saw a thing about Reddit where people increasingly are recommending that people split up. People talk about relationship issues and whatever, like am I the asshole or whatever subreddit, and then people are increasingly suggesting break up rather than compromise or find solutions or whatever. Someone's done a big content analysis of this.
Break up with your real life girlfriend and get an AI bot instead.
It simplifies things.
Yes. Less fleshy though. Anyway.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le boonga, boonga.
Right.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the BungaCast Reading Club. You, a member of the innermost circle of BungaCast listeners and specifically subscribers. This is kicking off a new season, new year of the BungaCast Reading Club. As you may have seen, we have already announced and identified the themes which will structure a lot of what happens on BungaCast over the next year and maybe beyond that. This also informs what we're doing on the Reading Club. We're going to announce more of the readings in due course so that you're able to prepare to read up if you want, to send in questions in advance of the reading or just in general for your interest. If you're interested to know what we're reading and what we're thinking about, that might be a good window into it. You may have seen we've announced the themes. I did an announcement in a recent episode. It is in the latest newsletter. If you're on Substack or indeed wish to receive, so you can just receive the emails. Bungacast.substack.com is where we have our monthly newsletter with thoughts about the end of history, as well as catch-ups on what you may have missed and announcements about what is coming up on BungaCast in the forthcoming month. So subscribe to that. A version of that is also published on the Patreon. Now, so these themes, if you haven't seen them, I wanted to tell you a little bit what they are. They're five of them. State capitalism. So this is, if you're a listener, you have listened to episodes this year, I think early this year, or it was at the end of last year, an episode on state capitalism came out, a very important episode, which in many ways, I think, frames a lot of these questions, sets out a lot of the questions that we wish to explore. I think it's fairly self-evident what we're talking about, but it's, in part, it has questions like, is China the future? But importantly, state capitalism is not just a Chinese story. In fact, it's a global one. And so we want to look at these and associated political economic questions like when will the next crisis be? What will it look like? What will its attempted resolution be? Secondly, the pre-political. I understand that this might not be as transparent a term as it is to me, although now that I'm going to be here and have to explain what we mean by the pre-political, this is maybe a challenge. But I guess you have the completely non-political, which may involve something like your relationship with your partner at home or philosophical questions about like mortality. Mortality doesn't seem to have any obvious connection to politics. It seems pretty much non-political. But actually, I was going to use that as an example. And then I remembered that we read a book in the Reading Club, I think 2-3 years ago, called, or which has the subtitle, Why Mortality Makes Us Free, by Martin Hegland. And in that is a philosophical argument about, in favor of secularism and atheism, which is tied to mortality. We all die. And that serves as the basis for making an argument for why we have to make something of our lives and have commitment to things in our lives. And that stretches out into a kind of philosophical political vision. So that would be an example of something which is pre-political, something that underlies the political, serves as a basis for collective action in pursuit of changing the world in some way. To put it in. Does that make sense? Or
It does make sense. Can I give a definite? I'm not sure I agree though. I mean, part of I think the purpose of selecting these themes is to deepen our understanding collectively of them. But what I understood by the pre-political, it's got at least two elements. One is, what are the sorts of subjects that are produced at the moment? The people who, all of us who are going to do politics, what are the things like? So we've talked about parenting already. We've talked about the inherent illness paradigm. Do we all see ourselves as unwell or not? Lots of other questions in that area. What are these processes that produce the subjects that are going to do politics? And relatedly, I guess there's always the question of what is the dividing line between what's political and what's not. Like, what is this domain of human life, the political? How's it made up? What are its limits? We don't need to talk about liminality. I mean, I guess we could if we wanted to, all this sort of stuff. But I think these are, what comes before politics? I mean, is politics possible? And if not, is this because we don't have the right inputs? And, that's, I think, a broad set of questions that I would like us to address when we're talking about the pre-political.
Better than my vague explanation. At least pointing out that, feminists would also say that your relationship with your partner is something that is actually directly political. So, but it also might form, what is your family life? That might inform the kind of capacities for politics you might have, or visions that are created in the politics that you may adopt, etc.
Yeah,
right.
A good example of that might be the fact that people are living at home for longer.
Yes.
Well into their 20s and 30s. Does that produce the kind of robust, independent subjects that we might hope to create political movements? Probably not.
I'm going to do revolution, but I have to be home for dinner. Otherwise, my mom gets quite upset. Number 3, the third theme is militarism and war. We're really looking at how dangerous the contemporary international disorder is, where conflicts are arising, what the role of new regional powers is in provoking conflict. And so this is a way of us continuing what we do and have done since the start, which is kind of casting our eyes around the world and looking at, okay, what is Turkey doing in its immediate environs, the Saudi Arabia, for example, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think I need to say too much more about that. Although I will, one of the kind of guiding questions is what does the cause of peace look like today as well? Which I think it's been a long time since we've actually done something directly on that. Maybe time to do that.
Maybe we do need to give peace a chance in our 2026
yeah,
program.
Well, that's a good line. You should do that.
Maybe nobody's ever thought of it that way.
Number 4, irrationalism and unfreedom. So this is something to do with thought, I suppose, again. So what are the primary forms of counter-enlightenment thought today? What political forms do they take? And what elite justifications are there for emerging unfreedom and domination? We've spoken for a little while about kind of new justifications for hierarchy, which emerge amongst the kind of alt-right, particularly the tech-aligned alt-right. So that's one example of the type of thing that we might be exploring in this. In fact, I've got one episode I'm quite excited to do, which should be coming up in the next month on this. And then finally, political recombination, which I guess is potentially the most obviously bunga of these questions and priorities, themes, which is what revolts against the established order are going on today. What does a political scene of kind of hybrid or thin ideologies look like? What is populism, or what comes after populism? What are all these kind of strange forms of politics which involve real class realignments or other forms of combinations between ideas groups and social classes which didn't previously exist, all this kind of thing. And today's episode is maybe one case of us exploring this.
Yeah, I mean, also paying attention to the vibe as well, having a vibe check of contemporary politics. You might shake your head at this, but
not too much of that, please.
Yeah, but a little bit. I think this is a little bit important. It's not every episode is going to be on the vibe, but sometimes vibes are premonitions of deeper recombinations. So
yeah, sometimes looking at vibes is just a way of getting distracted from serious analysis. Sorry to be a party pooper.
Yeah, I mean, well, maybe you're not the vibe. You're not.
I'm not the vibes
for the vibe check.
Clearly, somebody else can come on and do the vibes.
I can be the chief vibes officer of the podcast if we
you're very
need,
vibesy, George.
one.
You're down with
Thanks.
the kids.
Yeah, maybe because you've just been too liberal the night before. That's what happens. Right. So
Post-liberal, yeah.
One last thing about the reading club in general before we get into the specifics of today's reading. This is going to be manned by a rotating cast, as BungaCast is nowadays, and so it'll be a kind of horses for courses approach, and we're going to draw on our contributing editors and indeed a kind of wider circle of an inner circle, if you want to put it that way, of friends who we would like to discuss some of these things with them, depending on what the theme is and so on. The article, the readings themselves, we've actually gone through a whole different range of ways of doing this, and we've done whole books. We've broken up big books into small sections. We've done essays. We've done combinations of essays and articles all together. What we're going to do this reading club this year, it's going to be shorter articles, often sometimes academic articles, which we want to bring, which are maybe not so dry or which we want to make wetter, if you will. And
I mean,
as well,
also literally by spilling liquids on our printed copies of them.
right.
One of us has done in preparation for this discussion.
Very
I
good.
got it wet.
Also, classic essays, often by dead people whom we can't interview, and therefore we will talk about what they've written. Perhaps the occasional film where that is appropriate. So we're going to try to mix it up a little bit, this reading club. And as usual, we look forward to your contributions and to your responses afterwards. And what we're going to be doing is answering the questions from the previous one in the contemporary one. So things that emerge from this early February reading club will be discussed in March and so on and so forth. Right. So today's
before we start, I just wanted to make a point on the cast, because I was reading Love's Work by Gillian Rose. I don't know if either of the two of you have read this, and she makes this point about I'm hearing myself saying this, and this is quite a tangent, but bear with me. That in classic Greek drama, you had these two characters: the alazon, who's the imposter who boasts of more than they know, and then the iron, who's the ironical jester who feigns ignorance and knows much more than they reveal. And then the third character is the bomolochus, the buffoon. So I think what we also want to do in this reading club is kind of play with some of these traditions of trialogue and three-way conversations in this case of today, in the kind of the Greek tradition, which obviously then went on to inform Western drama very deeply. So listeners should make their own decisions: who's the alazon, who's the iron, and who's the bomolochus at the end of the episode, judging our characters on what we say in the discussion. I just wanted to put that in there because I thought it was interesting.
Okay. Illiberalism, a conceptual introduction by Marlene Laruelle, is what we're discussing today. It was published in East European Politics, volume 38 from 2022. This is an article which deals, I guess, with three of the different themes that we've set up as priorities: political recombination, quite obviously, as well as perhaps unfreedom. Indeed, it's called illiberalism after all. And thirdly, state capitalism, because I think some of the ideas that illiberalism tries to capture deal with formations that are appropriate to the age of state capitalism or to a post-liberal and certainly post-neoliberal capitalism. So maybe this is just a way of illustrating that we're not, that the readings that we're picking dialogue with the themes that we've identified, but it's not like, one article goes in each theme or something like that. Nothing so rigid as that. This is also a reading which builds on a lot of the stuff that we've discussed in terms of regarding the radical right. We have an episode which came out the same week that this is coming out with J.F. Trollet on the ideology of the global right and as it relates to Trump's foreign policy. And it's also dialogues with a long-standing exploration of populism on this podcast, in which we've been critics of populism and of its critics. But also, I think it's worth saying that we've long held the view, if I can kind of editorialize this way, that populism is the form that politics takes nowadays. It's the logic of politics as such. nowadays, rather than being a specific ideology which intercedes into the post-historical utopia. Everything would be fine if it weren't for those damn populists. So, as a way of setting this up, and I don't want to talk too much, but as a way of kind of introducing the setting into which illiberalism emerges, as Marlene Laruelle has it, conservatism collapsed probably a long time ago. I would put it, in the West in the 1970s, as the agrarian interior was subsumed, and certainly, maybe even before that, as monarchism died off as a political force. Socialism collapsed in 1991, if not sooner, and all that was left was liberalism. But as we've discussed many times, it decays without its antagonist. What's characterized the past 35 years, I think you could say, is something like hyperliberalism, expressed in market fundamentalism, imperialist war and policing in pursuit of liberal democracy around the world, human rights held up as really the only moral value or the only way of understanding morality. Individualism would be another facet of, or hyper-individualism as a facet of this liberalism. And probably finally, in a chronological sense, progressive identity politics as the kind of final stage in this liberal hegemony of the post-historical era. But at the same time, we find that liberalism cannibalizes itself. Surveillance and forms of governmentality injure or diminish or unravel the liberal bourgeois individual. The degree of inequality generated by neoliberalism makes popular ownership impossible, which is one of the fundamentals on which 20th century liberalism rested. Self-determination on an individual and collective basis is undermined, and so on. All of this is to say that illiberalism, as is going to be discussed today, can be understood both as movements which understand themselves, or movements or politicians who understand themselves as illiberal, who challenge the liberal order, as well as a tendency perhaps within liberalism itself. Lots of people are talking about illiberalism. As our author comments, say, research on illiberalism is now moving fast and becoming incredibly rich. There's now a Routledge handbook of illiberalism and an Oxford handbook of liberalism, if you want a ready-to-hand resource for what illiberalism is. And you're probably listening to this going, yeah, but you haven't told us what illiberalism is yet, and I haven't done the reading, so what the hell? We're going to get there in just a second. The author of this article, Marlene Laruelle, is a French historian, sociologist, and political scientist specializing in Europe and Eurasia, is the author of books such as Is Russia Fascist?, which is actually kind of tempting, and also several more sober titles on Central and Eastern Europe, which I think is the homeland of studies on anti-liberalism. So as a way to get started, why is discussions of anti-liberalism or illiberalism so often centered on Central and Eastern Europe? Why is it the capital of illiberalism studies? In fact, Laruelle starts off the article by praising the seminal work, The Light That Failed. That is a book by Ivan Krastev and Stephen Holmes, which we discussed in the Reading Club back in episode 114. So I would suggest checking that out, in fact, as a kind of companion to this episode, if you're interested. But yeah, why? What's the connection between Eastern Europe and illiberalism?
If I had to guess, I'd say it's because after the Cold War, the idea that liberalism would expand to incorporate the ex-Soviet states has been, and would spread and embed itself, has simply been refuted by the evidence. Shock doctrine has been created massive social dislocation, particularly in Russia, as the author notes, but also in several parts of Eastern Europe, and has led to the rise of oligarchic regimes, sometimes imbricated with organized crime, and eventually a backlash against liberalism, which manifested quite early on, even in countries which had benefited from more economic, cross-border economic integration. So I think it's a kind of failure on Europe's doorstep, right? It's the one that we should have got right, because we expanded the EU, we expanded NATO, and that didn't work. And it's the one that Western scholars who are fixated on the West will observe most plainly, even though there are many other examples, I think, potentially around the world, depending on how you define illiberalism. But her argument in the piece is that you have to be post-liberal to be illiberal, the way that she defines it. She doesn't want it to mean everything that's not liberal. It doesn't mean not liberal. It means you've experienced liberalism and then you're turning against it. And that has happened in a very short space of time in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I think it's kind of easier for Western scholars to talk about like Central and Eastern Europe as being illiberal, because it then it makes it easier to kind of escape the point that I think is very true, that, as Alex put it, like liberalism doesn't exist. It's like hyperliberalism, and it's decayed anyway. So it's a bit easier to displace this kind of questions of illiberalism onto like Orban and Hungary. They're bad. I mean, the problem is over there. I mean, things are fine here. So I think there is a little bit of that kind of displacement of some of the problem. I mean, which I think come through nicely in some parts of the article, like the link between liberalism and illiberalism. They're in a permanent situational relationship. They're in a permanent situationship, and I think that is that kind of that dynamic or dialectic is important to grasp, and you know, it's kind of easier to just say, no, this is a problem over there, we're fine here in the US, in the UK, wherever.
Yeah, and that gets to the root of what's kind of a bit confusing or slippery about this, which is that, you know, liberalism, at least traditionally, has something to say for itself. As broad as it is, you know, you can identify, and Laruelle does in this article, different political liberalism, economic liberalism, cultural liberalism, geopolitical and civilizational liberalism even. Anyway, but you can identify what liberalism has to say for itself and chart it through its history, especially in its early history. It was very forthright about what it saw as its vision for the world, its philosophy. And illiberalism is a negative, right? So what is it? It's just against liberalism. Okay.
Well,
but we can, you know.
No, I mean, just to jump in here on behalf of the listener who maybe hasn't read the piece. Before I read it, I was trying to think, like, what are the similar ideas, or what would I guess illiberalism is? And obviously you've got post-liberalism. I think that puts a historical kind of relation between liberalism and whatever comes after. Anti-liberalism. I think anti-liberalism is quite unusual for a political ideology not to have liberty as a central idea, central concept. I mean, what exactly is meant by liberty is, you know, very changeable, and you know, different theories of ideology have different ways of explaining how you decontest this kind of the meaning of this contested concept in some ways of putting it. But like, it's quite a tough sell to say like freedom's bad. You know, like join our kind of political movement. We're not offering you freedom. That's quite. I mean, it's not impossible, but it is a slightly tricky sell. And then the final one was, if you'll forgive me for this in advance, is illiberalism. So like, liberalism is ill. It's unwell. It's terminally ill. So it's like Lil Wayne said, I'm sick, not ill. But liberalism is ill. So it's illiberalism. And I think that point that you made about decay, Alex, is kind of contained in there.
Could you just explain that joke a little bit more?
Yeah, I can.
I'm sure it'll get funnier the more we spend on it.
In the article, it's illiberalism, so it's like I can't do this. Liberalism.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is ILL space liberalism.
So let me relay for listeners who haven't read this, because maybe even delayed in having done this, what Laruelle's argument is around illiberalism. Right. So she sets out 4 criteria. Firstly, illiberalism is a new ideological universe that, even if doctrinally fluid and context-based, is to some degree coherent. And that's an obvious point against those who would say, well, illiberalism is just this grab bag of people reacting to liberalism, but with no real unifying element to it. There are all sorts of different political forces, ideologies that fit under this. She says, no. It's a new ideological universe that is at least minimally coherent. Number 2, illiberalism represents a backlash against today's liberalism in all its varied scripts: political, economic, cultural, geopolitical, and civilizational, often in the name of democratic principles and by winning popular support. And, George has already mentioned Orban. Orban is a liberal. I mean, even by his own, that's a term that he uses. But of course, has won elections democratically, even if he's worn away at democracy once in power. This is often one of the kind of contradictions that plays itself out. But nevertheless, It's a backlash against liberalism, but often in the name of democratic principles and by winning popular support. Number 3, illiberalism proposes solutions that are majoritarian, nation-centric, or sovereigntist, and favoring traditional hierarchies and cultural homogeneity. I don't think I need to spell that out anymore. I think that's maybe the most straightforward of these criteria. And number 4, illiberalism calls for a shift from politics to culture, and is postmodern in its claims of rootedness in an age of globalization. Just to spell that out a bit, because I'm sure that's not easy on the ear listening to that, and not just because of my voice, but the words themselves. Postmodernism, rather than the propagandists of the age of globalization, in which everything is fluid, borders don't matter anymore, everything is kind of self-referential and recursive. This postmodern says no to liquid life, to liquid modernity, and says there are things which are essential, which are rooted, which are perennially true, etc. All these forms of backlash against postmodern flux. Hello, friends. You've reached the end of the free part of the episode. Well, we put out 2 entirely free episodes a month. The rest is for subscribers. For access, please join us at patreon.com/bungacast. For $7 a month, subscribers receive episodes with the entirety of the BungaCast cast. That's George Hoare, myself, Alex Hochuli, and our contributing editors, Philip Cunliffe, Lee Jones, Amberly Frost, Catherine Liu, Alex Gurevich, Ryan Zikraff, and Lee Phillips, as well as a huge number of guests. In 2026, our priorities are to explore the following themes: emerging state capitalism, war and militarism, political recombinations and new revolts, irrationalism and unfreedom and how to challenge these ideas, and the pre-political, or the social bases on which politics may be built. We'll also be exploring these themes through the BungaCast Reading Club, through a selection of classic essays, book chapters, films, and academic articles. If you sense history accelerating but feel that we have no control over events, then join us as we try to find political clarity to move beyond the decadent age of Bunga Bunga.